Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for today's Fireside Chat webcast. I'm Chris McCahill with the Congress for the New Urbanism. The title of today's chat is Thinking Regionally, Building Locally, and we'll be talking about the interplay between regional plans and local design decisions. Joining us today will be Bob Dean, who is the Deputy Executive Director for Local Planning with our regional planning agency here in Chicago, CMAP.
Which stands for
the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. And then
for inviting us.
Thanks for coming. And we'll also be joined by Christie Oostema from the Planning Director for Envision Utah in Salt Lake City, where, of course, CNU will be holding its 21st Congress, May 29th to June 1st. You can find out more about that at cnu21.org. And now I'll turn it over to John Norquist, who will be leading the conversation today, the President and CEO of CNU. John?
All right. Thank you, Chris. We are actually in a very local, regional situation here. We have the person from CMAP here, Bob, and we also have Christie from Envision Utah, and right across the street, and you could hear them at any moment, we have a high school band that will be playing, hopefully not during our broadcast. There's a cheerleading event that's about to happen. But if you suddenly hear a band playing, well, it's the local band trying to drown out the discussion of regional planning. All right, so let's get right to it. We have Envision Utah, which is in the Salt Lake City region, and we have CMAP, which is the Chicago area. Salt Lake City has the fastest growing rail system in North America, and the Chicago area has the slowest growing, well, maybe not the slowest. Buffalo is the slowest growing rail system in North America. But it's a big, vast system with a huge commuter, by American standards at least, a huge second largest commuter train network, second only to New York, and the CTA, which has, almost 200 miles or a little over 200 miles of track, something like that.
I'm not sure how many miles exactly. But
yeah, we'll calculate that. We'll have somebody look it up during the show and have the answer in just a few minutes.
Right.
All right, so Christie, we're going to start with you. How have you done it? There you are in the most conservative political state in the country with, you just think it'd be impossible, but there you are with the fastest growing rail system. What on earth is happening in Utah?
Well, I think in Utah, we certainly are the reddest state in the nation, but we're also pragmatic. And planning for our future is I think, a very pragmatic approach, right? We plan for so many things in our daily lives. Why on earth wouldn't we plan for our communities and our regions and make the best possible place for future generations? So I think in Utah, we've tried to keep our conversations about planning, about transit, practical as opposed to political, and that's made all the difference. Envision Utah is a public-private partnership that was convened 17, 18 years ago now. We have our quality growth strategy that just celebrated its 15th anniversary. And that organization is really hallmark of what we do in Utah. We created a broad-based partnership to think hard about how we wanted to grow. We were growing very rapidly, looking at a million new people. For a small state, that's a lot of new people. And that rate of growth was kind of scary. And the implications of that happening the wrong way, we were able to demonstrate those and explore alternative options. One of those options we explored as a region included transit, and over time we were able to sustain a lot of public conversation at the grassroots level a lot of conversation at the grass tops level, and came together and worked on a rail system. The second funding round even included a portion in which the public chose to tax themselves for it. So, yeah, we've had a lot of success. It's been really exciting.
Now on that point, you had a public visioning process that was at the beginning led by a couple of members of CNU, John Fraganese and Peter Calthorpe, and they used a poker chip technique that if you just went on the way you were going, people could see that it was going to cover much of the beautiful landscape that's in the Salt Lake area. Whereas if you did transit and well-planned communities which had some compact growth within them, that then you could save a lot of that land and not have it be covered with development. You want to describe that process?
Yeah. We held dozens of workshops all around the region where community members could get together with their neighbors and friends and people they hadn't met before. They gathered around tables. On the tables were maps, and on those maps, people were tasked with a practical challenge. Where would you put 1 million new people? Where would you put all of the jobs associated with those people? How do you choose to get those people around? People explored those options in practical ways. They used paper chips representing various land use types and densities ranging from, say, 5-acre lots to downtown lofts, and they could express their ideas using these little chips. They used markers to identify transportation routes and modes, and in these workshops, people would then take these collective table maps or responses and share those ideas across the room. People in the room could see common themes starting to develop. Those themes were used to create 3 alternative scenarios, exploring pictures of the future that were different than our trend scenario, where we were headed if we just continued our current path or course.
Now, I've heard both Calthorpe and Fraganese talk about this, and they're actually very proud of what they did, and they were absolutely thrilled when the administration of the Mormon Church actually embraced Envision Utah, which is an important thing when religious leaders start to look at the land use patterns, and that's happened in some other parts of the country with other churches where they've taken the lead on this kind of issue. But could you just briefly describe how the Mormon Church got involved in caring about land use issues?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think it's a large leader in our state, and leadership is interested in creating the best possible future for those of us who live in Utah, and the LDS Church was invited into the process along with a lot of other community and regional interests and partners. And I think there was a sense, that the LDS Church was working alongside the business community, other nonprofit and community-based organizations, and alongside government, and really in service to the larger public. And they were a major piece in a huge partnership puzzle. And taking the time to cultivate all of those stakeholder relationships and partners over time has just been so worth the effort and the investment. Everybody came to the table.
Now, in Utah, of course, Brigham Young, he didn't call it regional planning or anything, but Brigham Young actually did a lot of planning, the dimensions of the streets and laying out the street grid for Salt Lake and all that sort of thing. The early pioneers that came to Utah. In Chicago, there's also an early design intervention by not the original founders of the city, but less than 100 years after the founders of the city, Daniel Burnham and all of his colleagues like Alfred Kloss and various Louis Sullivan and all the rest of the architects and planners that were involved in the late 19th and early 20th century. So Bob, at CMAP, Daniel Burnham sort of looms over the whole, everybody's, talking about the 2009 plan, 100 years after the 1909 plan by Burnham. So you've got Burnham looking over your shoulder all the time. How's that feel?
Well, we do. Yeah, the comparisons are inescapable. We actually, when we began work on our long-range plan, we also that same year started a softball team, the name of which was What Would Daniel Burnham Do? So that really we have to acknowledge that there is this real strong legacy of planning in Chicago, but also the environment that we're planning in today is very different. We have a built-up city already. When Burnham was doing his planning, there wasn't that much here. It was a growing city, but it was in its early stages. So right now we have, we're the third largest metropolitan region in the country. As John pointed out, we have the second largest transit system already. So,
and we have that mileage number now.
We do. The enterprising staff at CNU calculated that there are 224 miles of track on the CTA.
All right. So where are you at now in trackage, Christie?
Oh, I was afraid you were going to ask me. I think we're at about 150.
Okay, you don't have far to go. Of course, you're doing light rail, which is a little less expensive. Well, there is the commuter line.
The suburban rail system as well.
That's right.
And more miles than CTA.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how much Metro has, but So anyway, the way that you do regional planning in Chicago now is very different than you would do 100 years ago. There's not a lot of just sort of planning for brand new roads, brand new rail infrastructure in the middle of nowhere because the region's developed. So we really formed Go To 2040 as more of a policy-based plan.
So starting with preservation would be a really big part of it.
Preservation was a big part of it, trying to modernize the existing transportation system that we have, trying to make tweaks to our communities to make them more livable, rather than completely re-envisioning the way the region would look. One thing I should point out, too, is that Envision Utah was actually one of the inspirations for the way we did our planning work, the scenario planning that was done there 10, 12 years ago. When we were looking around the country starting up Go To 2040, that was one of the best single examples we could find of a good scenario planning process. So in the early days of Go To 2040, before we had our own work to show, we would show the illustrations from Envision Utah to be like, look, this is what we want to do with our plan. So I think that the whole scenario planning concept that you lay out alternative paths of development and then engage people in choosing which one of those is most attractive is a really powerful way to do regional planning.
Yeah, I went to some of those meetings, and it did seem a little bit like the way Envision Utah was going. All right, so there's a lot of preservation, but there is infrastructure that's being promoted. Some of which I really like, extending the red line that'll add value to the property on the far south side of Chicago. Yeah,
that's one of the. Our plan has a real focus on maintaining the system we have and trying to bring it to what we call a state of good repair. And that means be able to have the system operate in such a way that there's not a lot of slow zones on the trains, that you don't have bridges that are not adequately maintained. So really our first priority is try to get what we have into good condition and then also modernize it to not just rebuild our infrastructure the way it is today, but when it's reconstructed, try to make it better, try to add technological solutions in there when we can. But we do also have in our plan a number of major infrastructure projects. One of them, as John mentioned, is the extension of the Red Line. That's the highest ridership CTA line currently, from where it currently stops in the city of Chicago about 5 miles further south. So the neighborhoods it extends through are among the lowest income neighborhoods in Chicago. Trips from there to any place else in the region are very long and arduous to make because of the number of transfers and connections you need to make. But the southern stop on the Red Line currently is one of the highest ridership stops in the whole CTA system because of the number of people coming up from the south to try to access that point. So that's one example. There's a few others in the plan of other major infrastructure investments, but we really tried to balance the importance of maintaining what we have versus making improvements in places that need it.
Now, in terms of goals, and now I'll ask you both this question. In the case of Chicago, there's not so much a fear of overpopulation. The population is growing slowly, but there's more of a concern about, like, the city, is well below its peak population of 3.6 million.
Right.
So there's actually a desire to have more growth, have more population.
Part of it is that, and part of it is where the growth happens once it does occur. So even though there's been a lag in growth the past couple of years because of the recession, the region was growing at a decent pace before that. We expect that pace to return. So it's all about where that growth happens. And one of the major priorities in GO to 2040 is having as much of that as possible happen in infill locations in communities that already exist where we don't need to build new infrastructure to serve them. As we calculated as part of GO to 2040 that we have about 100,000 acres of vacant or underused land already inside municipal boundaries in the region, and we should really be focusing on developing that land first before we do new greenfield development.
No, it just happens that real estate trends are moving a little bit in that way. Young people, the younger generation, seem to like the more urban lifestyle, whether it's in the city or in urbanized suburbs like Evanston or Oak Park. But other than market mechanisms, is there anything that the CMAP can do to help make this happen?
Yeah, I think there's big questions like infrastructure investments and where are we building major infrastructure, because that drives where development is attractive to happen. But then beyond that, we also have
then you don't need to even think anymore about building the West Side Freeway, for example.
Right.
Good. Glad to
Yeah.
That's off the CMAP.
That's not one of our major projects that we're pursuing. Right. But we also have a program to work with local governments around the region. We started this shortly after GO to 2040 was adopted in 2010, and it was funded by a grant from HUD through their Sustainable Communities program. So we started with that, a program we call our Local Technical Assistance Program that has helped local governments to try to bring their plans and their zoning ordinances into alignment with GO to 2040, because really one of the barriers that can keep communities from getting the kind of development they want is they may have zoning ordinances that prohibit exactly the kind of thing that they want to see.
Or their local infrastructure plan is to build overscaled streets instead of streets that would actually create the kind of central business district that they actually want, village centers that they actually want. All right, Christie, your problem isn't decline of population or stagnant population. Even during the recession, Utah has been growing. So how big is Salt Lake City going to get?
Yeah, right now we're just beginning a launch to look at our next 2 million people, which we expect to see by 2050. So yeah, we continue to be among the fastest states in the nation in terms of population growth. And I think in terms of rail transit, we're looking at this point into how do we maximize the great system that we've built. In many cases, we've built our rail line first, and now we have a lot of land use decisions to make.
I've noticed when I was traveling around Salt Lake City, the first time I was there was in 1959 or something like that on a family vacation. We were on our way to California. Went to Salt Lake, and I floated without having to try in the salty water. And my dad lost his car keys, locked them in the car, and then it turned out there was another guy with identical car keys about 5 cars down. And by a miracle, we almost converted from being Presbyterians to being LDS, sorry. We almost converted instantly because of this car key miraculously showing up. But anyway, I was, then there was not much in the way of transit or anything, but I've noticed now, you've got all this vast transit, but the rail stations really are mostly parking, and so is the plan to have dense, interesting, complex street patterns and lots of people living near these train stops?
Absolutely. It's interesting. We were able to secure historic rail rights of way, which largely, of course, ran through mostly industrial areas. And so that's what you see today on a number of the stops. However, we're seeing some tremendous examples of that shift, and of course, one is in the heart of our downtown. City Creek Center is a $2 billion investment that was made in our downtown during the heart of the recession. And that brings new housing, new office space, new retail to our downtown. On the other end of the line is Daybreak. It's, I think, the best or one of the best-selling real estate developments, new urbanist in the country.
It'll have
really different models.
It has 2 light rail stations there, right?
I'm not sure.
Anyway, I saw that, and it is you can walk to the train, and there are buildings close to that stop. And downtown, it was remarkable. I was there at rush hour, and there were just all kinds of people. The platforms were just packed with people.
Yeah, the trains are packed. Yeah,
I was very impressed with that.
The university is another hot spot. About 35% of all traffic to the university and its adjacent business center is on train.
So I know in the West Coast, actually, you can affect land use a little bit with water policy. You can own land, but if you don't have access to the water that crosses the land, if you don't own the water, then you may as well not own the land. So to some extent, that's a limit on sprawl, isn't it, the availability of water?
Certainly, yeah, certainly in our state. Probably an issue that comes up as often or maybe more in the more metro area of our state is the federal land borders and then topography. So the Salt Lake Valley is a valley surrounded by mountains that are too steep to build on, many of which are home to our national forests, and that does act as a limiter to growth. If you visit Salt Lake City, it also provides tremendous opportunity. I don't know of another downtown where you can be really in the heart of the city. You can hop on your bike and be in a canyon in 5 minutes if you just go up City Creek Canyon above downtown there.
That seems to be paying off for Salt Lake City. Goldman Sachs put a big one of their biggest offices in the world in Salt Lake City, and those were a bunch of alley cats from New York City. It's the fact that they found the urbanism they wanted in Salt Lake City. That's pretty impressive. Yeah.
And then the access to the outdoors, that's literally adjacent to downtown. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. All right, so continuing this, we have basically Brigham Young meeting Daniel Burnham here, updated, of course. But, Bob, when you look at if you had, an extra $40 billion for infrastructure, do you think that would end up going to transit and things that support the plan, or would it end up going to highways that otherwise shouldn't, in my opinion, be built?
Right.
Like, I know the Ileana Expressway is one that's a little bit controversial.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's in your plan, but it doesn't seem to have, real enthusiastic language attached to it. So maybe there was a little bit of a.
Maybe I should explain how the plan treats major projects like this. We're the Metropolitan Planning Organization here. I don't know how many other MPOs are on the phone, but so we have one of the requirements for our plan, it does serve a federal role, is that it needs to be what they call fiscally constrained. And that means that for any project that's in there, we have to identify adequate revenues to build it. So the Red Line project we were talking about is a fiscally constrained project, meaning that if we had suddenly an infusion of money, that's one of the priorities where we'd put it. And there are a mixture of highway and transit projects on that fiscally constrained list. The highway projects typically are those that are sort of closing gaps in the existing system rather than dramatic new expansions. So the Ileana is actually not a fiscally constrained project. There's a lot of discussion about that project right now, and I'm sure there will be discussions at CMAP about this as well. But right now, it's not one of the fiscally constrained projects in our plan.
But on the other hand, it's not about to be built either. I mean, it's going to be a while before it comes up.
Yeah, you never see highway projects built overnight, so it's a long process.
There's controversy that happens in Salt Lake City as well. Christie, isn't there a big expressway being built on the west side of Salt Lake County?
Yeah, there certainly is.
Is there any controversy with that, or is just everybody say that's cool, let's go with it?
No. We had a freeway project west and north of Salt Lake City that came online several years ago, and that was a really arduous and contentious process, but I think our region learned a lot from that. And in building the Mountain View Corridor on the west side, more recently, it was initially slated as a freeway, and through the public process and a real sustained and well-coordinated effort, what was built is actually different than what was initially planned. It's not a freeway. It's a divided roadway that includes bike lanes, and it's got transit and vision down the line too.
Wow. So the process opened up. That's an impressive achievement.
Yeah, I think it's an exhibit of people really learning through process.
Maybe I could mention a project like that we have in Chicago too, and that's the northern extension of Route 53. So that's a road that is an expressway. It currently just kind of ends at a county border. Our plan has the extension of that as a fiscally constrained project, and that's been a really interesting process because there has been a very strong historical opposition to that project primarily by the environmental community. But
including George Ranney of
yes.
the Prairie Crossing, he and his wife developed Prairie Crossing.
But recently, about a year ago, we were involved in a process with the Illinois Tollway to develop a kind of new vision for how that project could look. And at the end of the day, we ended up with something much like Christie was describing. It was not a normal expressway, but a skinnier road with lower speed limits, which gives you more design capabilities. And at the end of that, as a direct
11-foot lanes instead of 14-foot lanes,
so I don't know how wide the lanes are, but I know that it's smaller than what some of the proponents were advocating. But George was a co-chair of that group and ended up supporting the project in its current form, and so did most of the major environmental groups in the Chicago region.
Now, speaking of the relationship with Illinois DOT, we recently had a training program with the Institute of Transportation Engineers and CNU at CMAP, and CMAP participated in it, to have traffic engineers be able to open up their playbook and see more options, which the ITE Street Guide, which came out 2 years ago, it says they can, for example, go down to 10-foot lanes in an urban context, that the turning radii can be tighter, and it seemed like the engineers really enjoyed it.
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, we were involved in that. We support it. You guys did all the work, so I need to give you credit for making that whole thing happen. But I think it was really useful for both the local staff who were at the session as well as the IDOT employees. And I think that approach, I think, makes a lot of sense, that you want to hit the local engineers, but also the IDOT, Illinois Department of Transportation engineers.
I don't think they had any idea that they had permission to be able to do things that were more urban. You know, they just automatically assume. And, you know, a lot of environmentalists, and I would, I guess, include myself in that category, over the years have been critical of traffic engineers. But I was on the committee that helped create that book, so I actually got to know some traffic engineers. Guess what? Some of them are actually human. And they really do. All of them are human. And they're actually very open to looking at things in a new way. It makes their job more interesting. You get into an urban context, and suddenly, you know, what works in a rural area, strictly rural area, doesn't necessarily work so well in an urban area. So that was a big breakthrough. Christie, when you look forward 20 years in Salt Lake, in the Salt Lake region, We're getting a feedback here. Oh, it's all right. Doesn't matter. Temporary. Anyway, when you look at that, what do you see? Where do you see Salt Lake fitting in to the constellation of great American cities? I mean, are we going to get to the point where Salt Lake grows enough that it has international flight connections like Denver and Chicago and New York? Is it going to become one of America's major cities, or I mean, in terms of like top 5, top 8 American cities, or are you guys content to have this wonderful quality of life with being one of the top 20 cities or so?
Yeah, I think we're a wonderful mid-sized city, and by the way, with our fantastic Delta hub, we can fly direct to places like Paris and Tokyo. So.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Excusez-moi, mademoiselle. So I've got a colleague that flies to Tokyo all the time, and it's I think it's pretty cool to be able to do that in a city that is definitely in growth mode and a young city. I guess my hope for Salt Lake is that we could be a stunning example to maybe a playbook for new Western cities. I think Eastern cities developed largely pre-auto and have their own sets of unique challenges and opportunities. And cities in the West are largely newer with very different opportunities and challenges. And so I think we're a laboratory that's enthusiastic about testing and arriving at best practices and being super creative.
All right. Well, Chris has a question for our guests. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, John, CNU partnered with CMAP here recently to host a workshop focused on giving communities a tool that they could use to help design their streets a little better. And that's a lot of what CMAP does with their local technical assistance, working with the local communities. And I think for that workshop, we reached out to some of the communities that CMAP already works with, but there are a lot of others that aren't involved. So I guess maybe a little bit more understanding about how CMAP becomes involved with a particular community and what the opportunities are for communities to work with CMAP, or how that comes about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. Well, to start with, maybe a little bit of just more information about the Chicago region. We have 284 municipalities here, which is a lot. We have a total of about 1,400 units of government when you count up everything. But the municipalities are the ones most important to us, really, because they're the ones who regulate land use, which is important for driving the region's built environment. But I would say more than half of these communities, they don't have any professional planning staff. They're responsible for making development decisions. Their planning commission and council still are responsible for dealing with proposals that come in from developers, but in many cases, they don't have anybody who has a planning background to help them evaluate these. So the LTA program is really designed to help provide more capacity and more staff support to those communities that don't have the ability to do planning by themselves. So right now we have about 100 projects in our program. We've completed about 30, so those were counted in 100, and then we have a lot that we're either working on now or about to start up. And we just began a new call for projects as well on Friday of last week. So the way we do this is communities apply to us. It's a competitive application. And then with the ones that are successful, they either get our staff time. We have a staff of about 20 people, which offers staff assistance to these communities to do things like writing comprehensive plans or zoning ordinances or downtown plans, whatever else their priorities are. We have a combination of that, but then also offering, in some cases, consultant assistance. We have a group of pre-qualified consulting firms that works with us as well that we give projects to also. So it's a large program, and really it's meant to provide planning help to those communities that wouldn't otherwise have the resources to do planning, to get their plans and ordinances to be more consistent with the GO-TO 2040 plan.
Okay, I have a question for Christie. Can you hear the band in the background?
No, sir.
You can?
No, I can't.
Oh, well, then it's not that intrusive. It's a pro-immigration rally. We finally figured out what it was, and they have some drummers going. But Anyway, if you can't hear the revolution, maybe it's not happening.
Sorry.
All right, Chris, you have a question for Christie.
Yeah, Christie, is there a similar process like that for Envision Utah? How do you work with communities? What does that process look like?
Yeah.
And I guess maybe another part of that is what happens after you step out of the picture a little bit, too.
Sure, and I think that's such an important question. We enter into processes invited, and we are wanting to make sure that we help create a framework for sustained life of a visioning effort. And so the technical scenarios planning process that many visioning efforts undertake is a relatively small part of our overall effort. There's an enormous stakeholder and partnership development piece of every project that we do, because we want to make sure that everybody's at the table that needs to be at the table, and that includes those folks who are impacted by the outcome of the process, and those people who have the ability to implement the vision that's articulated in a process. And so that is such an important piece, just to make sure we do the stakeholder development properly, so that long term there's the leadership there and the resources there to realize a vision.
Yeah, now can you hear the revolution happening? By the way, CNU headquarters is on the Federal Plaza in Chicago, right across the street from the federal courthouse. That's where you'll remember Rod Blagojevich made an appearance just about a year and a half ago. And I actually saw him going off in his van to his new dwelling in Colorado or wherever it is, just outside our window. But anyway, it's very exciting. We have the pro-immigration rally going on right now. I'm pro-immigration, so it doesn't bother me. But you can probably start to hear it now. We have just a little bit more time, and I wanted to ask a little bit about the mix of housing, workforce housing, having housing near places where people work. Is there a chance that we're going to see a lot more mixture of income types and different people being able to live together? We've seemed for the last 60 years have had a segmentation where different price groups of housing are segregated off in their own subdivisions. One of the great blessings of urbanism is that you get a diversity of housing types. Are we going to see that in the Chicago metropolitan area?
I hope so, and we have part of our local technical assistance program includes some projects specifically focused on housing. It's a program that we call Homes for a Changing Region, and we do it in collaboration with a few nonprofits based here in Chicago. But the point of that is really to work with local governments to look at their current housing supply and then current and future housing demand. So when we look at the aging of the population, the diversification of our population, there's really a need in many communities to have more types of housing available than they currently do. But we find that the best way to talk about this, it's really hard to say that from the regional level. But when you get into a community and start to really work with them on quantitatively, here's what your housing looks like now and here's what we expect to see your population look like in the future, you really can be convincing in making your point that you need a diversity of housing types here. So I think, that's a priority for CMAP. It's something that we've spent a fair amount of time and capital on at this point, and I think we're going to continue pushing that idea. And I think that the demographic changes that we're seeing, the aging of people and the overall greater racial and ethnic diversity in the region that we're constantly increasing is going to mean that you need more different types of housing for different types of
I think Evanston's figured that out, where they have a lot of multifamily housing, a lot of apartments.
Oak Park is very proactive and very deliberate about trying to foster a type of community.
So that when you reach an age where you can't take care of that big Frank Lloyd Wright house that you've got in Oak Park,
somewhere down the street.
You can live on Lake Street in downtown Oak Park. Christie, are you Are you looking at, are they looking at that issue where, I know when I was at Daybreak that, the nuclear traditional family is really important there. There's a lot of single-family houses, and you've got a growing population. Unlike most metropolitan areas in the country, Salt Lake City actually does have a growing market for single-family housing. But there's also people that like to live in a more urban environment, people that are of a certain age, either young or old, need to have living arrangements where they can be close to stores and things like that. So are you sensing that there's a big demand for this more urban type of housing?
Absolutely, and I'd echo everything that Bob just said about the need for mixed income neighborhoods. And our region has a grant, a HUD Sustainable Communities grant called the Wasatch Choice for 2040, where we're taking a careful look at our transit station areas and the potential for mixed income communities at those sites. And we're really excited. We've got one site in particular that's just wrapping up a low income housing structure that's just phenomenal. It rivals any market rate amenity in terms of amenities for sure, and it's especially designed to house refugees. I think some youth that are aging out of foster care. So it's a great opportunity to really bring a regional plan down to a local scale, identify specific needs, and address those.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear it, but we can certainly hear it. This rally is getting quite exciting here. But I do want to just talk a little bit more about this. The diversity of housing types is something that's really important to affordable housing. If you look at where poor people live, less than 25% of people under the poverty line live in any situation where they're subsidized by the government. So if you take state programs, federal programs, it's less than 25%. That means over 75% of people under the poverty line are finding their housing someplace else, or they're living under an underpass, or they're living in, some of them are lucky, maybe they get in a rent-controlled apartment in the west side of Manhattan or something. But there's a lot of different things out there. But when you have this sort of monoculture, single-use zoning and the sort of sprawl housing pattern, it makes it really hard for people like that to find what they want. And whereas if you look at the older pattern, the main streets in older American cities and all that, you'll find these apartments, or you'll find coach houses behind the old houses. Restoring that kind of complexity and diversity of housing type, I think it's one of the great civil rights issues coming up in this century. I really think that, we're not going to be able to subsidize everybody's house. There's not enough money. The governments are constrained on money. But one thing we can do is allow these forms to come back. The coach house, the granny flat, the allowing developers of apartments to have units that face on the alley so that the rents can be lower. I mean, you can live in the same building with a millionaire. The millionaire looks at the beautiful street. You're not doing so well financially, then you face the alley. But you're in the same building. You're the same community. And I think we really need more of that kind of thing, because there's not enough money. An alderman like my alderman Joe Moore, he can go down to City Hall and try to get all the money he can, but he's not going to get it. And ultimately, places like East Rogers Park, where Heather Smith is here with us today, and she lives in East Rogers Park, and my wife and I live in East Rogers Park. There's big diversity of housing, but most of that housing was built just before or after World War I. And that type of development is really hard to do today. And one of the things that CNU is doing is trying to change the regulations that impede the development of this kind of urbanism. We've been working with FHA to lighten up their rules, which really almost enforce separate use zoning. So that's a big thing for us, and I think it'll make it a lot easier to reach these objectives. This is something we can learn from Utah, Christie, that not every, having the government become more intrusive isn't the answer to every issue. And in this case, there may be ways that we can actually use some free market theory to get better outcomes for people that have constrained incomes. Bob, you want to? We're going to give each of you one last comment.
Sure.
We have CNU 21 coming up in Salt Lake City. It's going to be based on our conversation today. It'll be Brigham Young meets Daniel Burnham.
Right. I think based on what you were just saying about housing affordability, I think that's a really interesting point. And HUD has definitely signaled that they are going to be more ambitious in enforcing fair housing laws of different types. And that's really what you're talking about here. The communities need to permit a variety of different types of housing and not just the monoculture. So what we're trying to do, we think that it seems as though
they should do it. They should do it for their own good. Some of the suburbs, exactly. Some of the suburbs have figured it out. Evanston has.
Yeah.
I think Wilmette is figuring it out. Mm-hmm. That's F. Scott Fitzgerald. Rich kid suburb, Wilmette. But now suddenly they're thinking, we do need more apartments along Green Bay Avenue because we have elderly people and other people, their kids, who want to live in the community. If you don't provide any urban forms of housing, your kids are going to leave.
Right.
They're not going to be around.
Yeah. No, and the approach that we take, I think it's good to have an agency like HUD that is saying, we have these regulations for fair housing, we're serious about enforcing them. And then the role that we can play as a regional agency is helping those communities that want to do better with creating a diverse supply of housing and voluntarily ask us for help. We can step in and help them do that planning if they don't necessarily know how to do it themselves, or housing is a tough issue. You often want to have experience working in that someplace else before you come into a community and start talking about affordable housing, which we bring. So I think that's one of the ways that the regional and the local levels can really interface, is we can be providing assistance to local governments and helping them achieve these kind of broader planning goals when they don't have the resources to do it themselves. And
speaking of resources, the local people are looking more and more for anything they do to add value to their communities, so they have a tax base. They used to not worry so much about that, but right now, in order to pay their firefighters and cops and everything else, whatever they do, it has to add value.
Exactly.
Christie, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, is this our parting comment here?
Yes, and you be sure to invite everybody to come to Salt Lake City on May 29th, 30th, 31st, and June 1st.
Yeah, I just was fishing to see if that's where I needed to head. I am so excited to welcome everybody. I'm not a Utah native. I'm somebody who grew up visiting while living in many other places around the country. I chose to come to Utah for some educational work 15, 16 years ago now, and thought I'd be in and out in 2 years, and the place just grabbed me, and I haven't left. So it's phenomenal. Downtown, as I said, is adjacent to the mountains, and you can literally walk from downtown up a canyon. And so just the place itself is worth a visit. I mentioned our $2 billion investment in downtown called City Creek. Daybreak on the other end. CNU offers several tours of both of those places, and you get a chance to ride the light rail line in both cases. We have sessions on incremental TOD, which I personally think is very intriguing, especially post-recession and post many mega projects that we maybe would have seen 10 years ago. The Envision Utah story will be told in a couple of sessions. So it's a great regional story. I think a lot of CNU's focus is more site-based, and I think that's very important work too. But the part of CNU's charter is also region, and I think it's a great opportunity in Salt Lake City to really reflect on region. So I hope that you come and participate in that conversation. Just really excited for everybody to come out, and hope to see you all there. Rich Louv will be there talking about the intersection between nature and city. Sarah Suzenka talking about her Not So Big House, Not So Big Life ideas, great stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. Plat of Zion, all of that, the Mormon planning stuff will be a part of the package. So if you're just familiar with Burnham, you can come and learn about Brigham.
Yeah, and Andres Duani is going to be delivering a plenary lecture on, part of which will be about the LDS Church and planning in the 19th and early 20th century.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a session, too, that'll touch on the block structure and the urban agriculture that was envisioned kind of from the beginning. People were envisioned to have kitchen gardens and small orchards in their backyards, and you see that in the urban fabric yet today when you look at the shapes and sizes of residential lots in the city. It's fascinating.
There's going to be a lot of things happening, and it'll be a great event. We'll be having a party on Saturday night, the last night, so I hope everybody will be there for that. This is going to be one of the great parties. Well, Saturday is one of those days which is really exciting in Salt Lake City. Monday night, not so much. I've been to Salt Lake City on a Monday night. That's family night in Utah, and you go into like a restaurant or bar, you're all by yourself. But on Saturday, man, it's really something. So, all right. Well, Christie, I really appreciate your involvement with the Congress and with our show today. And Bob, appreciate the conversation. We'll be able to continue this out in Salt Lake. Look forward to everybody coming to that. And this is John Norquist speaking live from across the street from one of the great rallies at the Federal Plaza. We have Mies van der Rohe buildings surrounding the demonstrators. It's quite a sight. I feel like Edward R. Murrow looking down on it from the rooftop here. Anyway, this has been a fun show, and we look forward to seeing all of you CNU members coming out to the Congress in Salt Lake City. Thank you very much.